Welcome back, guys, to episode number 11 in this series, and actually the second part in this mini series that I'm doing on building this inventory. So if this is your first time watching, definitely go back and see the first inventory episode. There will be a suggestion right here on the top of the screen. Just click on that and watch the first episode. If not, keep watching because in this episode we're actually setting up getting our inventory items that we actually have drawing out on the screen. So these are all the items that I have in my inventory, and we got the colors and we got the text all dynamically updating based on our item that we have. And so it doesn't seem like a lot from here, but if we actually jump into our code, this is what we actually built, all of this stuff here. So be sure to stick around for this video. And if you guys have been watching my series and have been really enjoying it, be sure to like the video below. That really helps me out. And also subscribe if you guys are enjoying the series as well. Or if this is your first time here, be sure to check out the other videos and subscribe, like I said. And I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. Alright guys, so here we are at the beginning of this video, and obviously you see that we still have just our basic stuff here, and honestly I don't even know right now what I'm going to cover necessarily in this video. Obviously you guys have already seen what we did, but I'm not sure right now. But I'm just going to start by jumping into our JS page here, and I'll just show you what I did. So I set up a basic module here, and I'll kind of go over a little bit how I'm doing the structure for the game. So basically what I'm doing is I'm separating each of the different aspects, like our chat and our mining page and our production stuff, separating all of it out into different modules that are all handled individually. So like each one of the modules has an init, and basically you're calling the init on most of these from the game. And so for our inventory specifically, we're calling our init, and then the init is just calling to draw and then add our actual listeners to anything inside of our inventory. So right now inside of the draw, all we're doing is just adding our custom scroll bar that we did in the first video, and then we're adding listener to this, and I believe this listener is just to the actual button. So if we take a look, it's just on this button. And now, so what I think I'm going to do first is actually show you guys how I actually go through the process of moving all of our static HTML over into our script and actually getting it drawing out dynamically. So right now I have a bunch of placeholder items in here that are just made with HTML right in our HTML page right here. So if we jump, we see obviously we have our bronze helms. We have a whole bunch of them right here. And what we want is we just want to copy one of these divs, and then we can go ahead and just delete all of these out of here because it's just going to be blank when it first loads. And so what we want to do is inside of our draw function now, I usually just define all of these loop variables beforehand, but it's really up to you. And actually before we do the length, we want to just go ahead and get the inventory. So we'll do the player.getInventory. Then we can go ahead and do our length as that inventory.length. And now what we'll do just to set this up is run through a loop of all of our items in our actual inventory. So now we've got a loop going, running through each of our items. And now what we want to do is we want to set up our HTML. Well, actually what we would do first is, I think what you'd want to do is actually create a separate function, because we're going to want to be able to insert items dynamically as well, just in case an item gets added to the inventory, which will happen often while the player is actually playing. So what we want to do is make a function that actually just adds that item to the inventory, or the HTML in this case. So what we could do is just do insert new item, or in this case we could just do an insert items, and then in this case we could actually pass an array of items that we want to add. So what we would do then is we want to obviously grab the wrapper that is around all of these items. So if we search for our inventory, if we just find the ID of our listing that we have right here, so we have the HD inventory list, and we want to grab that because we're going to want to save that wrapper. So I usually just define it as the wrap, and we'll do get element by ID, passing in that. So now what we want to do is actually just define an HTML string here, and obviously it's just going to be an empty string to start. And then of course we'll actually define all of our loop variables, because now actually this draw function isn't even going to call any of this anymore. And so now here our length is just going to be our items that we pass in dot length, and now we're going to be running through a for loop of these items. So we'll go through the length, and now inside of here we just want to do our HTML, and then we'll go ahead and just paste in our div that we actually made. So now what we can do is go ahead and I'm going to just get rid of all of these spaces. And now once we have that in our actual loop, we're now adding the HTML. So what it's going to do is run through that full list of items that we pass in, and it's going to create one of these for every single item. And then what we can do is at the very end, obviously we have to actually use this HTML. So what we can do is grab our wrapper and do the inner HTML and set it equal to the HTML that we just generated here. But actually in this case, you wouldn't use the inner HTML, because remember, we want this function to call, you could potentially call this function multiple times while you're playing the game, and this would override the inventory that you already have. So what we really want is we want an insert. So we would use a dot insert adjacent HTML, and then we want to insert it at the end. So we'll do before end of the closing tag, and then we'll just insert that HTML there and then just get rid of what we had here. And so now all we need to do is inside of our draw now, we just call to actually insert items and then just grab that player's inventory from here. And now I believe this should work, so let's give it a shot here. So it should have drawn that many. So you see now we have a ton of them in there, because I believe, I'm not sure how many items I actually have in my inventory, but if we actually take a look, this is all of my inventory right here. So I'm not exactly sure how many items this is, but you can see that it's quite a few. So that's why we have a really long list of items now in here. But obviously they're all the same, which isn't the case. So the first thing that we can do, the most basic thing, is if we look in here and see what data we have for each item. I believe this might be, or this is one item right here. So we see that the stuff we have is a name. So name is probably the most important thing. So the name of it is right here. So we can access that property from the items we pass in. So if we jump back in here into our JS page, what we want to do is, instead of putting this here, we want to go ahead and break this string, just by breaking the string here and then adding our pluses. And now we want to actually add something in here. So we're going to be doing the items I.name. So now the actual item name will get inserted rather than the static HTML that we had there before. So now if you take a look, we'll actually have all of the items printed out here. So you can see that pretty much all of them are different. I mean, I have a lot of duplicate items, but these are all the different items that I have in my inventory right now. So if we take a look in our actual data.js page, where I'm holding a lot of our static data information, if we look, we have rarities here. And so the type rarity 1 is, we have our names and then our colors defined for each one. And then the palette is just referencing our actual color palette that we have defined here, because I use that for other things too. So what we can do is, if we actually look at our HTML page again, we'll see that in here we have, if this is our item again, we can find that we have a classification. So there are classifications on these, and obviously some of the items like the or and stuff has a classification of null because it's not really a rarity. But what we can do is just go ahead and assume that the classification null is going to be a rarity of 1. So what we can do is actually jump in here, and if we want to figure out what this rarity is, or the color in this case, we could say make a new variable for rarity and actually set it equal to the items I.classification. And then what we can do is, we know that some of those are null, so what we can do is just put or 1. So that means that it'll check the classification. If the classification is null, then it will go ahead and just default it to a value of 1. So we know all of our gear pieces have classifications defined, so they'll actually use their classification rather than the 1. But like I said, some of the items don't have classifications, so we'll need that. So now what we can do is actually make a new variable for color. And we're going to be using this color in multiple places because we actually need it for the background, the border, and the name. So now if we go ahead and look at our structure in the data, we can obviously do our game data dot rarities, passing in that number that we have now. So if we do game data dot rarities and then just access the rarity that we have here, then we should be able to use that color now. So let's go ahead and take our span tag that's holding our name and delete the color from here, and now just do what we did with the name and break this string and actually put that color in here. And now let's see if it actually colors the names like we want it to. We've got those in there, but they're all white, so obviously there must be something wrong with our classification stuff here. Okay, so it was just a stupid mistake. Obviously I isn't defined here because these need to be inside of the for loop. So what you would do essentially is just actually set our rarity and color properties inside of here. So we could just copy this, paste it here. So now what it would do is it would actually define the rarity here, and then the rarity here can just be, you don't really need to default it to anything because we know that it would grab it here. So we can just take that color and then also set that equal to there. And so now this will get set dynamically inside of this for loop so that it'll be different for all of them. And then again, we can just get rid of that color there. And now we should notice that there's some of them should be colored. Okay, so I was confused as to why it wasn't working, and I realized that I had gotten our rarities correctly, but I hadn't actually accessed the color property that was inside of each of the objects for the rarities. So now that we added that dot color, we can actually take a look at this working now. So you'll see that some of the items are different colors now. So those are our higher rarity items. So we have like our uncommon items, and then we have some of our very rare and our legendary items on here, and you'll see that they're kind of hard to see on this background, so I may end up having to adjust the colors. But in any case, let's just go ahead and add those colors now to our icon. So now in this case, we were setting our border on the icon right here for our CSS. So I'm just going to copy that border and delete it from there. And then what we can do is go ahead and jump into here, and on our icon we'll just start a new style tag and paste in our border, and then just go ahead and delete the color and do what we did with our string. So we're going to be actually just using the same color variable that we did before. And now to get that background, I have a couple of functions I need to use on our actual color, because the colors in our game data are actually stored as hexadecimals. So if I want to get what I have written inside of our HTML, or in this case our CSS, I have our background here on the icon, and in order to get an opacity on this, we not only need to convert this to RGB, but we need to also convert it to RGBA to get that background. So I have a couple functions that we can use for that. So we'll copy that background and jump into our script, and then again inside of that same style we just did, paste in our background. And now what we want to do is just go ahead and delete that, and then again break our string. And then what we want to do is we have a couple of functions here that we use. So we have our hex to RGB function, and then we also have our change RGB to RGBA. So the first thing we're going to want to do, the one on the outside will be our change RGB to RGBA, and then on the inside of this we're going to need hex to RGB, and then we pass in our hex value. So we pass in our color, it gets converted to RGB, and then we pass it into our RGBA, and then it gets converted to, gives it our opacity. So now the only thing we need to pass in is the opacity that we're using. So I think like 0.3 was what we were using. So now if we jump in here, we should have some pretty diverse items. So you'll see now we got the nice opacity and the nice colors, and they stand out really nicely. And so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and fix these items right here. So as of right now, there's a pretty easy way to tell whether an item is a weapon or armor. For the weapons and armor, we can easily tell the type by our item type variable here. If we jump back into our index, we want to run through this, and we're going to have to create a function that actually grabs and sets the information that's inside of here. So we'll create a function here that's just called get item subtext. So it'll be the subtext under the item, because we don't know exactly what's going to be inside of that subtext for all of the items. We just know that for the weapons and armor right now that we have our protection and damage and then our stats. So what we want to do is we'll actually pass in the item that we're looking for, and now we're going to need a string value, but we'll just call it our HTML. So now we'll just check to see if the item's item type property is equal to 1 or 2 in this case, which actually we have to write that out for both. So we'll do item and item type equals 2. So now we'll just make a note saying that this is for weapons and armor. So we know that that's going to be the case. So just to test that this is working, if we actually grab our span that we have going here, we'll just copy this span and delete it out of here, and then we'll put a break, and a break will actually call this get item subtext function, which will then return here our HTML that we generate. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll actually do our HTML plus equals this span, or these spans here that go inside of it. So it wasn't working, and the reason was is just because I forgot to pass in our item here. So we want our item's I to get passed in there. And now you'll notice that we load up correctly. And so now you'll see that only our weapons and armor have that stuff. So all of our ore doesn't have it. And then if we keep scrolling, we'll have a bunch of herbs and stuff that don't have it. And then you'll notice that all of our weapons and armor do. So that is exactly what we wanted. But now we want to fix this because we want this protection to either say protection or damage based on whether it's a piece of gear or a weapon. So what we want to do is first we know this 45 is going to be the item. If we check in our HTML page again for our items, we'll look at what kind of information we have here. So we know that each of them is going to have this value, which is stat power. So stat power is either the damage or the protection based on whether it's a weapon or a piece of gear. So we'll copy that. And now we want to go ahead and jump back into our index, and then we're going to say that we want the items stat power to get printed out there. And now for the protection, we're not going to delete this value just yet. We're going to say that we want to break this, and then we'll give ourselves parentheses here, and we're going to check to see if the item type, in this case, equals 1, then we want this to say DMG for damage. Otherwise, we want it to say protection because we must know that it must be 2 if it's not 1. So then we can go ahead and delete that protection there. And now you'll see when we refresh this, it should give us our protection and our damage. So we have protection here for the gear, and if we scroll down, we'll see we have DMG for our short sword and all of our weapons in this case. So it's starting to come along pretty nicely. So the next thing and the last thing we want to do here is we want to set up the stats. So the stats are a little bit trickier because in this case, if we look at our HTML page and see what kind of data we have, we're actually being returned our 4 different types of stat bonuses that we can have. We have strength, we have defense, agility, and reactions. So those are our 4 different stats that we can potentially have. And so obviously like our ore and stuff has null, but if we take a look at our piece of gear that we have, you'll see that these bonuses here are actually set to 0. And so what we want to do is we want to actually access those bonuses. And so I actually already have a function that I wrote before that actually does all of this for us, but I'm going to rewrite it anyways for this video so you guys can see how I would actually do this, the most efficient way to actually grab all of those stats and draw them out correctly. So we have in our data.js, we have our combat, and combat actually holds the skills and then a list of each of the skills that we're using. So inside of our index page, we want to make a new function here that actually gets us that stat information. So we'll make another function under here, and we'll call it getItemStatString. And so now what we'll do here is this will actually get us the string that goes in for the stats that we want, which is right here. So what we can do is we'll pass that item into here now. And now what we first want to do is we want to find our combat skills. So we're going to be running through a loop here. So we'll define our I, and then we want to go ahead and get our combat skills, which in this case we'll just call them the keys because these are the keys we're going to be running through. And also because we want to do our object.keys function and actually pass in the game data and then that combat and skills. And so by doing the object.keys, you actually will just get the list of these names right here. So now that we have the list of the keys, we want to actually run through a loop of these keys now. So we'll do the keys.length, and then we're going to make another for loop here that's going to run through these keys. So now again, we want to make another HTML variable, and it's going to be our empty string because we're actually going to be creating the string as we go. And then we'll go ahead and make another variable here, just define it as stat because we're going to define the stat here. So now if we jump back over to our actual index page, let's just check to see the actual format on these styles. So what we have is we have the name of the skill, of the actual combat skill, and then we have underscore bonus. So we can actually figure out how to access these inside of our loop. So if we jump back to our index page, we know we want to put in our keys at the index and then add our underscore bonus. So now we're actually finding that stat that we're currently on by running through these keys. And then we want to go ahead and just parse int on this value now because it's actually a string by default, and we have to tell whether it is a number that's greater than 0 in this case. So we would parse in, and now we have the actual integer value there. And so now we want to check to see if stat in this case, because obviously 0 won't work here, or null. And actually, just to make sure this works too, we will put an or 0 here. So by default, it will either do this, but if it's null, then it will, instead of parse inting on null, it will take the 0 and use that instead. And so now what we want to do is just go ahead and let's say that we want to do our HTML plus equals our plus, and then we want to actually put that stat in now. So we would do plus the stat number, and then we would do plus a space, and then obviously put in the abbreviation for the thing that we're looking for. And actually, instead, we can just do that right now that I'm thinking about it. So inside of our data, we actually have empty objects here for us to define stuff. So what we can do is actually just do an abbreviation tag here and do our defense. And then we have abbreviation here, or in this case, this one is supposed to be the strength one. And then we have our defense, and then we have our agility, and then our abbreviation for reactions, which I will just do REC maybe for now. I'm not sure. I don't think there's a great way to abbreviate that. Comment below if you guys have other suggestions for that. On the index page now, we'll go ahead and in this case, we can just access our game data again, and we'll do our combat.skills, and then go ahead and now access at the keys I, and then we'll do the dot abbreviation for that. So that was kind of a long thing we had to do there, but that was the only way we could access it right now. And now we want to go ahead and just add our comma and our space. So the only problem here is that this is going to add it now to the last one that's in there too. So what we have to do is at the end just add, in this case you could just return the HTML and do a dot slice on the HTML that we return and just start it from 0 and go to, in this case, the HTML dot length -1, I believe. So now that that's in there, all we have to do is go ahead and just call that from here now. So we have this actually generating that stuff. So now inside of here, we will actually call our new function for get item stat string and just pass that item through to there. So now if we refresh, let's just see if this works now. So you'll notice that it did work. It actually did return all of our abbreviations and our pluses. Everything seems to be working correctly. There's just a couple of things we need to clean up, obviously. So that slice that I made, I think that I need to go back one more. So let's try -2 and see if that gets rid of that last comma there. So now we see it got rid of the last comma, and now we want to go ahead and capitalize these, and I just have a function that I can use for capitalizing that first letter on the abbreviation. So if we just do a dot, I have a prototype for our capitalized first letter, and that is a function. So now it should just capitalize the first letter for us on those abbreviations. Alright, well, awesome, guys. So this was actually pretty productive. It wasn't everything I thought I was going to get done for this video, but it took a while just to kind of walk through all of those different steps that we had to take to get those items drawing out. So I hope this video was super helpful and you guys kind of got a better idea of how I actually structure my code and how we run through each function and do things a little bit more dynamically. And I know it doesn't look like we got that much done from our game right here, but it is cool to see all of our stuff in there now. And the only thing is the icon obviously needs to get changed, and I'm going to work on actually getting new icons in there. But there is still a few things and few important things that we need to do for this inventory. Obviously, we need to set up our menu. So when we click on this, it'll show the menu that I've designed right here so we can actually filter our items. And then we also need to get our actual sorting set up as well. So if you guys want to see a part 3 to this mini series that I'm doing on building this inventory, definitely comment below and I will make a part 3 where we actually set up some of these other things. Otherwise, I will find something else to work on for the next video, but whatever it is, I'm sure it will be super cool. So if you guys are enjoying this series, or if this was your first video and you want to see more, definitely click the link that will be in the description for the full playlist. And be sure to like the video below. That helps me out so much and it keeps me going with these videos. And also comment below, like I said, if you want to see a part 3 to this mini series, or if you have questions or suggestions about the way things are looking or everything's coming along, definitely leave those down below. Be sure to subscribe to my channel as well if you want to see upcoming content. My face is on the screen right here, so go ahead and click on that and subscribe to my channel, and you won't miss a single thing. Alright guys, I will see you in the next episode. Peace.